What's up Top 10 fam, hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host Ayman Hasan and welcome back to another video. Guys, we seem to really love abandoned cabins and their messed up backstories, and this is very quickly becoming one of my most favorite series that I've hosted on the channel thus far, so I won't leave you guys waiting any longer. These are the top 10 scary abandoned cabins part 3. Starting us off with number 10 is the family gathering. Back in December 1990, the Teed family went from Houston to a 2-story mountain cabin near Oakley for family holiday gathering. What they thought was going to be a fun Christmas away turned into something else entirely. Unbeknownst to them, when they got to the remote cabin, they were actually interrupting a burglary. The two culprits, Von Lester Taylor and Edward Deli, shot 2 of the family members to death, shot Rolf Teed in the face, abducted the Teed's 2 daughters, and then set the cabin on fire, like they did the most. Nearby locals heard gunshots from that area and called police and said they saw 2 men flee the cabin with 2 women. The police got there and a 10-mile car chase ensued, but they managed to catch Taylor and Deli and the girls were finally safe. Whew. Whew. Coming in at number 9 is the head. This one sounds like it happened in the 18th century or something, but it actually happened in May of this year. Now this story focuses on Michael Cummins, a Tennessee local who was accused of 7 homicides and who was also living in Westmoreland at the time. On April 17th, James Fox Dunn Jr. was found dead in a burnt cabin outside the area. And you'd think the burnt cabin or the dead body would be the worst part, but really James was discovered without a head. Now his body was found at the cabin and his head was found somewhere nearby. Now authorities were unsure whether his head had been decapitated during the murder or had been separated by some process of decomposition, but I honestly highly doubt that it was clearly the former. Either way, Cummins was later arrested when 7 more bodies were found at 2 locations near the same area, a town which only has a population of 2,000, like the man is out here killing half the population already. The other bodies were found 10 days after Dunn's body was found, and authorities called it one of the worst mass killings in the state's history. At number 8 we have the cat. Back in September of 2009, Sherry Green was on her way to Winnipeg to her family's remote cabin with her cat for a nice weekend away. She had stopped at her sister's shop on the way there and they argued over the cat and whether it should be taken there or not. Either way, Sherry made her way to the cabin and the last contact anyone had with her was a text to her niece saying the cat was missing. Now Sherry herself wasn't married, she had no kids, she had no one to leave all she had to, so she wasn't really a prime target for anyone, but that in and of itself could have made her the perfect target. Either way, her niece hadn't heard from Sherry in a few days, and so she got worried and called the landline at the cabin and Sherry's mobile, but to no avail. Sherry's sister Lisa decided to drive to the cabin to check on her, and immediately they heard the cat meowing from inside. They walked in to find Sherry sitting on a chair in the kitchen facing away from them. When they turned the lights on, they found her leaning so much to the side that her hand was actually touching the floor. There was a huge gaping wound in her neck and the amount of blood on the floor implied she was most definitely dead. The case has now been closed for 10 years and people still have no idea who did it or why they did so. Filling our number 7 slot is the attack. Now back in November of 2019, a Quebec couple and their 10-month-old daughter was staying in a remote cabin between Yukon and the Northwest Territories in Canada. The couple were there for maternity leave and had been there for 3 months at this point. One Monday afternoon, the father came home from a walk to the cabin and found the dead bodies of his wife and daughter. As soon as he got there, he was charged by a massive grizzly bear 100 meters from the cabin. Now the father managed to shoot the bear before it got to him, before obviously going closer to the cabin and finding their bodies. The mum and baby were home alone at the time, but what I don't get is how the bear got into the cabin, and even if they were outside, I don't see how she couldn't have just carried the baby and ran back into the cabin and just locked the door. But I also don't know how fast bears run, like I didn't Google that, and maybe it was a stealth attack or something, who knows. I believe if she could save both of them, she would have. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I've never been attacked by a bear. I don't know these things. Now at number 6 is the BENICIA teen. Back in October of 2015, Adam Buchanan, his fiancée and their son went to a cabin for a nice weekend getaway. Now their other son Nolan decided to stay back in BENICIA, but on the 11th of September, Sheriff John D'Agostini found the cabin burning in the midst of a 10-acre wildfire in the area. When the fire was finally over, investigators found the remains of 3 people inside. except they weren't just burnt alive, they had been shot beforehand. DNA testing confirmed that it was Adam, his fiancée, and their child, and so the sheriff contacted Nolan, who told them he had stayed behind. A few days later, authorities arrived with a search warrant at their home and found contradicting evidence in the house, as well as Adam's wallet and his fiancée's purse in a nearby park. Shady, very, very shady. Nolan had apparently stayed behind and then driven to the cabin, killed his family, and then returned to Benicia like nothing had happened. And there was literally no motive released about why he did it. Like why did you do this, dude? I need to know. I feel like I'm on an episode of Forensic Files. Why did you do this, Nolan? Coming in at number 5 is CRESSLER Creek Log Cabin. Located near Hoxie, Kansas, the area used to be used as a field hospital during the Civil War, so you can imagine the amount of death that took place there. The area soaked up the blood, the pain, and suffering of so many soldiers that many believe it draws the spirits of the dead towards it. Many people who have gone to visit the cabin have seen ghosts in bloody Civil War uniforms roaming the cabin and the woods around it at night. People have heard the sounds of rifles going off in the area despite no one really living there, so what exactly would the bullets be hitting? They also hear shouts from time to time of soldiers and their war cries. I feel like by now haunted cabins are like the least of our concerns with all these real murders and kidnappings going on, but number 5 is always just, like a nice breather from the list anyway. We can breathe. And now we can get into number 4. At number 4 is the CORBIN cabin. Now this cabin is located in the woods of Shenandoah National Park, and it's actually one of the last cabins standing since the park was created. George Corbin built the cabin in the early 1900s and lived there with his wife, Nee. In 1924, tragedy struck and Nee died during childbirth, leaving George a heartbroken, inexperienced single dad. Apparently, as soon as she died, George had to walk 4 miles to get milk for his baby, and I mean, did he take the baby with him? Did he ever find the milk? I have no closure there. These days, it's one of the most haunted hikes in Virginia, and 90% of hikers have seen the ghost of Nee roaming around the cabin. She never strays too far away from it and chooses to be right by where her child was brought into the world. Unable to raise him, her spirit swore to protect the child always, in death or life, evidently. Maternal instincts. Can't beat him. Filling our number 3 slot is the Bushman of VALEMOUNT. Back in September of 2014, Milton Ballon went to his otherwise empty cabin located south of VALEMOUNT. When he got there, the lock on the gate had been changed even though he owned the property and didn't change it himself. A man started walking towards him with a flashlight and said his name was John, but Milton was smarter than that and he knew exactly who he was. John Robert Bueller had been terrorizing locals in the area for months. Apparently him and his daughter had taken over a club's picnic area, the cabin, blocked a public trail, and even set their German shepherds on some horseback riders. Thankfully, Milton's neighbors in the area had told him about the situation before he'd even gotten there. He called the RCMP and a 4-hour standoff ensued where John used his dogs as protection while his daughter urged him to surrender. John had thrown all of Milton's belongings over a riverbank and filled the cabin with his own random things like cigarettes, tools, chicken feed even though they didn't have chickens, just weird things. He was told to leave many times nicely but didn't comply and kept saying, "We gotta talk, we gotta talk." John was a violent manic depressive who refused medication, and Milton gave him 7 days to get off the property. A week later he came back and called the RCMP again and they shot John, killing him. I mean, I don't want to say he deserved it, but like, come on John, how many warnings do you need? Get off already! Get off my property! Now at number 2 is JAYME Kloss. When this girl was abducted, I saw the stories and news about it everywhere. 13-year-old JAYME was kidnapped in October of last year after the culprit killed her parents with a shotgun. Imagine being kidnapped right after your parents are killed. Like, are you more sad? Are you scared? Like, what would you even be feeling? Now, the culprit had seen JAYME get on her school bus and had sort of developed an infatuation with her ever since and planned to kidnap her. In January of this year, JAYME managed to escape the remote location where she was being held at and asked the first person she saw for help. She had information about her captor, 21-year-old Jake Thomas Patterson, and they caught him 10 minutes later. efficiency. Jake was hiding himself and JAYME at a very remote, dingy cabin, and apparently he had grown up in a cabin 10 miles away from the cabin they were staying at. Apparently people in the area, even his high school teachers, had no idea he still lived in the area since he kept himself so isolated and hidden. Well, I'm glad justice was served in that one, even though 2 innocent people died, which we can't get back, but at least he's going to jail. And JAYME survived. Half happy ending, half not, what do we think? And finally, at number 1 is DIAN FOSSEY. Now DIAN was one of the world's most famous primatologists, and she was known for doing an extensive study of mountain gorilla groups for nearly 20 years. She studied them daily, published books on them, and she even lived in a cabin in the Virunga Mountains in Rwanda just to be even closer to her subjects. But on December 27, 1985, DIAN was found murdered in the bedroom of her cabin. Her body was found face up near a hole in the wall that had apparently been created by the assailants. Her research assistant was called to the house by the house servant and found DIAN bludgeoned to death. Her face was split diagonally open with a single machete blow. The cabin itself was an absolute mess. Glass was everywhere, furniture was flipped everywhere, but it wasn't a robbery. All her valuables were still there, and apparently it was a targeted killing. Now DIAN used to capture Rwandans in the area that were suspected of poaching and low-key torture them, like beat their testicles with stinging nettles sort of torture. She was well liked and well hated by the local community, so the murder wasn't as big of a surprise as you'd think. Either way, her entire staff were arrested, including a tracker who had tried to kill her with a machete previously. All of them ended up being released except the tracker, who hung himself in prison. I mean, if you just waited a little longer, you may have been released as well, buddy. And that's it for today's video, guys. Who knew there were these many tragedies associated with cabins? Oh wait, I did, because I warned you guys not to go to abandoned cabins in part 1 of the series, didn't I? Trust me sometimes, guys. Either way, let me know what you guys thought in the comments below, and as always, I'm your host Ayman Hasan, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!